everyone, Jeremy here, and today I'm going to be going over a seascape that I made in oils. I'm going to dive in and explain all the techniques that I use, and hopefully you learn something along the way. Even if you don't, I hope you have fun watching. So starting out, I decided to use a black acrylic gesso to get my canvas nice and dark. It might help to use a paper plate or something easier like that, but this is what I chose to do. I would suggest using a nice thin coat of this because putting on too much will make it take about 20 to 30 minutes to dry. All I'm doing is making sure I have a nice, even coat for this first layer. Moving along to colors, I'm going to be using titanium white, alizarin crimson, phthalo blue, and phthalo green. I'm just going to grab a little pinch from the bottom of that pile to make a little runway. Testing it out to make sure that it's dry, and it's been about 20 minutes, so it's good enough. And then coming up right here, I'm dotting on a few marks of liquid clear and then smearing them in, making sure it's a really thin coat. In the runway section of your phthalo blue, take a 1-inch brush and load it on both sides. Just using a crisscross stroke, scatter some through the sky. Using the same brush, you can load up crimson and do the same thing. Now switch over to your Filbert brush and load both sides through white, and I like to add just a touch of crimson in the mix. Now set it down anywhere in the top of your sky and create a circle. Once you have that, you can use spirals to continue it going out. Here I'm going to switch back to my 1-inch brush and use those same crisscross strokes from before to blend it out, still using a light pressure. And to add the moon in, I loaded some white on the end of my finger, and I'll try my best to create a little circle in the middle. And this is optional, but you can take a 1-inch brush and lightly feather it out some. I may or may not have remembered to record the first cloud, but I'll show you how I do the rest. Taking a fan brush loaded with white, I'm going to use some tight circles to scrub on the top edge of this cloud. My goal for when I create these shapes is to not have a straight line, and I also want to leave a layer of mist underneath any previous clouds. Additionally, I like to come back in with some more white and just stipple some on underneath that top edge. Now switch back to the 1-inch brush, and just using the top corner, you can very lightly circle some of that white down. Try to work in small sections and blend the bottom of the cloud out. Now we can just rinse, wash, and repeat for every cloud. Notice how I'm creating very unique shapes for the clouds, with the general focus of them coming back towards the middle. Now taking a fan brush loaded with white, I'll try my best to go up to the horizon and scrub on a flat line to act as the top of the ocean. Now that that's all blocked in, I'll get my palette knife and mix phthalo blue and crimson together, also adding some white to lighten it up, and I'm just going to stick on some background waves. Taking a clean 1-inch brush, I'll lightly go over the lines I tapped just to soften them up. Before I get ahead of myself, I'll take the dirty 1-inch brush that has the blue and crimson on it and just sprinkle some of that in the ocean. Now that I'm done with the background waves, I'll take a fan brush and load it full of dirty white, and I'll just create some slightly rounded wave tops so they look closer. Also, I'll take that fan brush and feather back some of the line in a flat sweep. I decided it was too light up in the background, so I grabbed some dark and just did the same thing again. I loaded my fan brush full of white, and I'll sketch on a little U shape for where the big crash section of the wave will be. To extend the rest of the wave out, I'll create a slightly diagonal line. Let's try that again. A slightly diagonal line. Now to add the thin translucent eye of the wave, I'll take a Filbert brush and load it full of white with a touch of phthalo green, and just do that same little circle where I spiral going outward. Now to create the big crash of the wave, I'll take a fan brush and load it through white and line it right up to the top of the U and create a little sweep that pulls over. I decided that there was too much of a gap between the big wave and the background ones, so I just used my fan brush to put some more in there. On the fan brush, I'll make a soft lavender color by mixing crimson and blue with a little bit of white, and this will end up being the underpaint for the foam. And to put these in, it's very similar to the clouds. Just use the corner of your fan brush and create some small circles underneath that cascade. And after you're done with that, switch back to the 1-inch brush and use that top corner again to soften up the bottom of the crash. So I loaded my Filbert through white, and I'll stipple it on the top of that underpaint and try to highlight individual clumps to bring them out. And like a cloud, I'll use that 1-inch brush to soften up the bottom. I also came back in with the Filbert and texturized the foam just by tapping. I sprinkled some white on top of the long section as well, and then very carefully and very lightly, I'll try to blend out the bottom of the foam. And then using a clean 1-inch brush, I'll pull down with a sweep to create the wall of the wave. I'll load my fan brush through a medium gray color and smear on a line that roughly matches the angle of the top of the wave. And I'll lightly take that fan brush and sweep it up into the shape I've already established. Here I'll do the same thing I did above, but I'll give this line a different shape with some curves coming back in. And using some flat cradle strokes, I'll pull it close to the other white line, but I'll make sure I leave some dark in between. To make the beach, it's very simple. I loaded my brush full of white and blue, and underneath that last layer of foam I just pull straight down. And now I'll blur those marks out with the horizontal pull. Once again, I'll go back to my trusty fan brush and load up red and blue to create a dark purple. Then I'll go up in the background and roughly sketch on the shape of a big rock that lives there. And after the edge is defined, I can fill in the rest with dark. Now to create the highlight color, I'll flatten down a pile of white with a touch of crimson and cut a roll right on the end of the knife. I'm holding it a bit awkward here, but what I'm trying to do is touch that roll right on the edge of the cliff, and I'll pull some of that thick paint straight down. And for those small areas, you can use the short side of your knife and get a roll and do the same thing. And I would consider this the hardest section because you're ultimately using no pressure at all. Imagine yourself letting the paint pull off the knife rather than you smearing it on. On top of the challenge of using no pressure, another thing that makes this hard is being very selective with your highlights. If you start putting on too much, it'll become one flat color instead of all these beautiful things happening. And to clean up the bottom of the cliff, you can load up a fan brush or a filbert and just tap along the bottom edge to create some mist. And with a clean 1-inch brush, you can very lightly feather some of that back into the waves. Now I lost one of my video files, but you can do the same thing as the cliff and make small rocks in the foreground. And I decided to use a liner to put the dark in. And to make the reflections for these rocks, I just use a 1-inch brush and pull it straight down to cut off the bottom of them and then go lightly across. Well, that about wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed and learned something along the way. And if you did, please consider liking and subscribing and comment what you want to see next. Until then, see ya.